The stagecoach rattled into Westcliffe, Colorado on a bitter autumn morning in 1878, carrying a woman whose eyes held more shadows than the Rocky Mountains looming in the distance. Margaret Nash stepped down onto the dusty street, her dark hair pulled back severely beneath a plain bonnet, her traveling dress wrinkled from the long journey. She carried only one small trunk and a carpet bag, remarkably little luggage for someone who appeared to be starting a new life. The other passengers dispersed quickly, eager to stretch their legs and find warm meals, but Margaret stood frozen on the boardwalk, her gloved hands clutching her bag so tightly her knuckles whitened beneath the worn fabric. She had expected Westcliffe to be bigger, somehow. The main street stretched perhaps 3 blocks, lined with wooden buildings that looked hastily constructed against the harsh mountain weather. A general store, a saloon, a boarding house, a small church with a crooked steeple. Behind these structures, the land opened into vast stretches of valley, with cattle ranches spreading toward the foothills. Snow already crowned the peaks in the distance, though down here the ground remained dry and brown, waiting for winter's first serious bite. "You looking for somewhere specific, miss?" The stagecoach driver, a weathered man with kind eyes, had climbed down from his perch and was unloading the last of the baggage. "Not many folks come through here without knowing where they are headed." Margaret forced a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "The boarding house, I suppose, just for now. Mrs. Henderson runs a decent establishment. She is strict but fair. You got people here." "Family?" The question made Margaret's spine stiffen almost imperceptibly. "No, no family. I am looking for work, actually. I was told there might be opportunities here." The driver's expression suggested he doubted that, but he was too polite to say so directly. "Well, Mrs. Henderson might know of something. She knows everyone's business in 3 counties." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, miss." Margaret thanked him and made her way toward the boarding house, aware of curious glances from the few townspeople on the street. Strangers were noticed in places like this, examined, discussed. She would need to be careful about what she revealed, what stories she told. The less said, the better. Mrs. Henderson was a robust woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything about Margaret in the first 30 seconds of their meeting. She quoted a weekly rate that was higher than Margaret had hoped but still manageable, provided she found work soon. "You are running from something," Mrs. Henderson said matter-of-factly as she led Margaret up narrow stairs to a small room on the 2nd floor. It was not a question. Margaret's heart hammered. "I beg your pardon. No luggage to speak of. Traveling alone. Jumpy as a cat in a room full of rockers." The older woman opened the door to a modest room with a single bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the back alley. "I do not pry into people's business, but I do not harbor criminals either. You kill someone." "No." The word burst out more forcefully than Margaret intended. She steadied herself. "No, madam, nothing like that. I just needed a fresh start, that is all, Mrs." Henderson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. We have all needed that at one time or another, but I run a respectable house. No men in the rooms, no drinking, no disturbances. Breakfast is at 6, supper at 6. Miss either meal and you are on your own. Understood?" "Yes, madam. Thank you." After Mrs. Henderson left, Margaret sank onto the narrow bed and allowed herself a moment of weakness. Her hands trembled as she unpinned her bonnet, setting it carefully on the small table beside the bed. The room was cold and she could see her breath in the air. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried not to think about the comfortable home she had left behind in St. Louis, the life that had once seemed so secure. She could not afford to think about that now. She could not afford to think about him. 3 days passed as Margaret searched for work. The general store did not need help. The seamstress who worked from her home already had an assistant. The saloon keeper looked her up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl before suggesting she might earn good money working upstairs, an offer she declined so firmly he never bothered her again. On the fourth morning, Mrs. Henderson mentioned that Samuel Easton was looking for someone to help his sister with household duties. His ranch, the Three Pines, sat about 5 miles outside town. His sister had taken ill that winter and never fully recovered, and with winter approaching again, they needed assistance with cooking, cleaning, and general household management. "Samuel is a good man," Mrs. Henderson said over breakfast. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he is fair and honest. Lost his wife 3 years back. His sister moved in to help with the place, but she is not strong enough to manage everything anymore. He has been asking around town for a month now, but most of the available women are not interested in ranch work, and he is particular about who he brings into his home." "Do you think he would consider me?" Margaret asked, trying not to sound too desperate. Her funds were dwindling rapidly, and she needed employment soon. "I will send word that you are interested. He usually comes into town on Saturdays. That is tomorrow. You can meet him then." Margaret spent the rest of that day trying to calm her nerves and prepare for the meeting. She pressed her best dress, though it was still quite plain, and practiced what she might say. She had experience running a household, that much was true. What she could not reveal was why she had left her previous situation, or the real reason she had fled St. Louis with only what she could carry. Samuel Easton arrived at the boarding house precisely at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. Margaret was waiting in Mrs. Henderson's small sitting room, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight despite her anxiety. When he walked in, she was struck first by his size. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that came from years of hard ranch work. His face was tanned and weathered, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting against the sun. He was somewhere in his early 30s, she guessed, with dark blonde hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore clean but worn clothing, a rancher's typical outfit of durable pants, a work shirt, and a leather vest. His hat was in his hands, and he nodded politely to Mrs. Henderson before turning his attention to Margaret. "Miss Nash," he said, his voice deep and measured. "Tom Henderson tells me you are looking for work." "Yes, sir. I understand you need help with household management at your ranch." Margaret stood, grateful that her voice remained steady. "My sister, Clara, has been unwell. She manages what she can, but it is too much for her now. I need someone who can cook, clean, help with preserving, and such. The work is steady, but it is hard. We rise early, and ranch life does not offer much in the way of leisure. Are you prepared for that?" "I am accustomed to hard work, Mr. Easton." He studied her for a moment, and Margaret had the unsettling feeling that he saw more than she wanted to reveal. There was an intelligence in his gaze, a careful assessment that went beyond her simple statement. "You have references? People who can vouch for your character and your abilities?" Margaret's throat tightened. This was the question she had been dreading. "I am afraid I do not, sir. My situation was such that I had to leave rather quickly, and I did not have the opportunity to secure written recommendations." "I see." His expression remained neutral, but she saw his jaw tighten slightly. "And why did you come to Westcliffe specifically? You are from the East, I can tell from your accent. This is a long way to come without knowing anyone here." She had prepared an answer for this, a half-truth that might satisfy without revealing too much. "I heard that Colorado offered opportunities for those willing to work. I wanted somewhere far from the city, somewhere I could start fresh. Westcliffe seemed as good a place as any." It was clear he did not entirely believe her, but he did not challenge her directly. Instead, he turned to Mrs. Henderson. "You have known her these few days. What is your assessment?" Mrs. Henderson, who had been standing quietly by the door, crossed her arms. "She is running from something, but I do not believe it is the law. She has been respectful, clean, and punctual. She does not drink and she keeps to herself. Whatever her past circumstances, I believe she is looking for honest work, not trouble." Samuel nodded slowly, considering this. Margaret held her breath. "The job comes with room and board," he said finally. "A small room off the kitchen. The pay is $30 a month, paid at the end of each month. Sundays are half days. You are expected to attend church if you are so inclined. I do not tolerate drinking, smoking, or inappropriate behavior. My ranch hands live in the bunkhouse, and they know to keep their distance from the main house. You will be safe there. Do you find these terms acceptable?" Relief flooded through Margaret so powerfully she almost felt dizzy. "Yes, Mr. Easton, very acceptable, thank you. You can start Monday. I will come by at dawn with the wagon to collect you and your things." After he left, Mrs. Henderson gave Margaret an appraising look. "He is taking a chance on you. Do not make him regret it." "I will not, madam, I promise." That Sunday, Margaret attended church for the first time since arriving in Westcliffe. The small congregation welcomed her with cautious friendliness, curious about the stranger who would be working at the Easton ranch. She spoke as little as possible, deflecting personal questions with vague pleasantries. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. Margaret was waiting on the boarding house steps with her trunk and bag when Samuel pulled up in a sturdy wagon. He loaded her belongings without comment, then helped her onto the seat. His hand was warm and calloused through her glove, steady as he guided her up. The ride to the Three Pines Ranch took nearly an hour. Samuel was not talkative, but the silence was not entirely uncomfortable. Margaret found herself studying the landscape, the way the valley opened up as they left town, the scattered herds of cattle grazing in the distance, the golden grass rippling in the wind. There was a stark beauty to this place, so different from the crowded streets and river fog of St. Louis. "It is very beautiful here," she said quietly. Samuel glanced at her, seeming surprised by the comment. "Most women from the East find it too isolated, too harsh." "Perhaps I am not most women." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Perhaps not." The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill. It was a solid structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch and a steep roof designed to shed heavy snow. Behind it stood a large barn, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse. 3 large pine trees stood near the house, clearly the source of the ranch's name. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Margaret could see cattle scattered across the surrounding pastures, tended by distant figures on horseback. "It is bigger than I expected," Margaret said. "We run about 500 head of cattle, plus horses. I have 6 men working full-time, 8 during roundup and branding season. My sister, Clara, manages the household accounts and helps with the cooking when she is able. You will be working primarily with her, at least at first." He pulled the wagon up to the house and helped her down. The front door opened, and a woman appeared on the porch. She was in her late 20s, slender to the point of frailty, with the same dark blonde hair as Samuel and pale blue eyes that held a gentle warmth. "You must be Miss Nash," Clara said, her voice soft but welcoming. "Please come in out of the cold. Samuel, bring her things to the room off the kitchen." The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable. The main room combined a sitting area and a large dining table, with a stone fireplace that radiated welcome heat. The furniture was handmade but well crafted, and someone had taken care to add small touches of warmth. Embroidered cushions on the chairs, curtains at the windows, and a braided rug on the wooden floor. Clara led Margaret through the house, showing her the kitchen, which was spacious and well-equipped, the small room where she would sleep, which was simple but clean with a real bed and a small stove for heat, and the rest of the layout. Margaret's room had a window overlooking the barn and pastures beyond, and she found herself already imagining what it would be like to wake here each morning. "I know Samuel can seem rather stern," Clara said as they returned to the kitchen, "but he has a good heart. He has had to be both mother and father to this place since our parents passed, and it has made him perhaps more serious than he might otherwise have been. But he is fair, and he is kind in his way." "I appreciate the opportunity," Margaret said. "I promise to work hard and earn my place here." Clara smiled. "I can already tell you are not afraid of hard work. Now let me show you where everything is and we can start on lunch. The men will be coming in around noon and they expect to be fed on time." The first days at the Three Pines Ranch passed in a blur of activity. Margaret rose before dawn to start the fire in the kitchen stove, prepare breakfast for Samuel and Clara, and have coffee and biscuits ready for the ranch hands who would stop by the kitchen door for their morning meal before heading out to their work. Then came cleaning, laundry, bread baking, preparing the midday meal, more cleaning, starting supper, evening chores, and finally collapse into bed just to begin again the next day. It was exhausting work, harder than anything she had done in St. Louis, but Margaret found a strange comfort in the physical demands. When her body was tired, her mind had less opportunity to wander to dangerous territory, to remember things she was trying to forget. Clara was easy to work with, patient and kind, though Margaret could see that even small tasks left her breathless and pale. There was something seriously wrong with her health, though Clara never complained and always tried to do more than she was able. Samuel was a different matter. He was unfailingly polite but distant, treating Margaret with the same professional courtesy he might show any employee. He rose even earlier than she did, often already out working when she came to the kitchen, and he ate his meals efficiently without much conversation. In the evenings, he worked on ranch accounts in his small office, or read by the fireplace before retiring early to repeat the cycle. Yet Margaret found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, the way he moved through the world with such purpose and certainty. She saw how gently he treated his sister, how patiently he dealt with his ranch hands, how carefully he tended to every detail of the operation. He was a man who took his responsibilities seriously, who carried the weight of others' welfare without complaint. 2 weeks after her arrival, Margaret was in the kitchen kneading bread dough when Clara came in looking even paler than usual. Before Margaret could say anything, Clara's legs gave out. Margaret lunged forward, catching her before she hit the floor and eased her into a chair. "I am fine," Clara protested weakly. "Just a bit lightheaded. You need to rest. Where is your room?" "Upstairs, but truly I will be fine in a moment." Margaret was about to argue when the kitchen door opened and Samuel came in, looking for something. He took in the scene in an instant, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "What happened?" She nearly fainted. "She needs to lie down." Without a word, Samuel crossed the room and scooped his sister into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. "I will take her upstairs. Can you manage things here?" "Yes, of course. Should I send for a doctor?" "No," Clara said from her brother's arms. "No doctor, I just need to rest." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he nodded and carried his sister out of the room. Margaret returned to her bread dough, but her mind was racing. Clara's condition was worse than she had realized, and from Samuel's reaction, this was not the first such incident. He returned to the kitchen 20 minutes later, his expression troubled. "She is resting now. She refuses to see the doctor, but I may insist this time." "She is very ill, is she not?" Margaret asked quietly. Samuel leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking exhausted. She had pneumonia last winter. It nearly killed her. She recovered, or so we thought, but she has never regained her strength. The doctor says her lungs were damaged, that the high altitude here makes it worse. He recommended she move somewhere lower with a milder climate, but she refuses to leave. This ranch is all we have left of our family. There was such pain in his voice that Margaret felt her heart constrict. I am sorry. That must be very difficult for both of you. Life is difficult, he said, his tone hardening slightly, as if regretting the moment of vulnerability. We endure what we must. He straightened, his walls going back up. Can you manage the household work on your own for a while if Clara needs to rest more, I mean? Yes, you do not need to worry about that. He nodded and left without another word, but Margaret stood there for a long moment, her hands covered in flour, thinking about the weight of responsibility this man carried and the way he shouldered it without complaint. That evening, after Clara was settled and the supper dishes were cleaned, Margaret took a lamp and went outside for a breath of air. The October night was cold and crystalline clear, with stars scattered across the sky in impossible profusion. She had never seen so many stars in St. Louis, where the city lights and smoke obscured the heavens. She was standing near the barn, wrapped in her shawl and looking up at the vast sky, when she heard footsteps approaching. Samuel emerged from the darkness, leading his horse toward the barn. Miss Nash, you should not be out here alone. I am sorry, I just needed some air. I will go back inside. Wait. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. I wanted to thank you for helping Clara today and for taking on more work without complaint. I know this is not what you expected when you took this position. I do not mind hard work, Mr. Easton, and Clara has been very kind to me. I'm happy to help however I can. He studied her in the lamplight, and Margaret felt exposed, as if those intelligent eyes could see through all her careful defenses. You are running from something, he said finally, echoing Mrs. Henderson's earlier observation. I do not know what, and I am not asking you to tell me, but I want you to know that you are safe here. Whatever or whoever you are running from, they will not find you here. And if they do, they will have to go through me first. The simple declaration, spoken without drama or bravado, brought sudden tears to Margaret's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. Thank you, she whispered. That means more than you know. Time will heal what words cannot, he said quietly. I learned that after my wife died. Some hurts are too deep for talking. Sometimes you just have to live through them until one day you realize the pain has lessened just a bit. Whatever you are carrying, give yourself time. Do not rush the healing. Margaret could not speak around the lump in her throat. She simply nodded, and after a moment, Samuel led his horse into the barn. She stood there in the cold, hugging herself, feeling something shift inside her chest, some small crack in the wall she had built around her heart. The weeks passed, blending into a rhythm of work and seasons. October gave way to November, and the first serious snows came to the high country. The ranch prepared for winter, with cattle being moved to lower pastures, supplies being laid in, and every piece of equipment being repaired and readied for the harsh months ahead. Clara's health continued to decline, though she tried to hide it. She spent more time in bed, and Margaret took over virtually all of the household management. She proved capable and efficient, and Samuel began consulting with her about supplies and household matters as he once had with Clara. Their interactions remained professional but gradually warmed into something approaching friendship. Samuel was naturally reserved, but Margaret noticed that he began to linger over his evening coffee, sometimes sharing stories about the ranch or asking her opinion on various matters. She learned that he had built this operation almost from nothing after his father died, that his wife had died in childbirth along with their baby daughter, and that Clara was the only family he had left. In turn, and despite her intentions to remain closed, Margaret found herself sharing small pieces of her own story. She talked about growing up in St. Louis, about her love of reading, about her mother who had died when she was young. She did not talk about her father's gambling debts, about the man he had promised her to in order to settle those debts, about the night she had fled rather than honor that arrangement. Those secrets remained locked away. December arrived with brutal cold and heavy snows. The ranch hands worked in shifts, keeping the cattle fed and breaking ice on water sources. Margaret kept the kitchen warm and welcoming, with hot meals ready when the men came in half frozen from their work. She learned to make the hearty, rib-sticking meals that sustained men doing hard physical labor in extreme conditions. One evening, a blizzard struck with surprising ferocity. Samuel and 2 of his men were still out checking on cattle when the visibility dropped to almost nothing. Margaret stood at the kitchen window, straining to see any sign of them through the swirling white, her anxiety growing with each passing minute. Clara came down from her room, wrapped in blankets, her face etched with worry. "He knows this land," she said, as much to herself as to Margaret. "He will find his way back." But another hour passed, and then another. Margaret kept the coffee hot and the fire burning high, trying not to imagine what might happen to men caught out in such conditions. She had heard stories since coming to Colorado about blizzards that killed cattle and men alike, about people freezing to death mere yards from shelter, because they could not see their way through the white blindness. Finally, near midnight, they heard the pounding of fists on the door. Margaret rushed to open it, and Samuel and his men practically fell inside, so covered in snow they looked like frozen ghosts. Their faces were red and raw with cold, their movements stiff and clumsy. "Get them to the fire," Margaret ordered, her fear converting instantly into action. "Clara, fetch every blanket you can carry. I will make hot soup and coffee." She worked quickly, heating beef broth and adding whatever she could find to make it substantial, toasting bread and brewing a fresh pot of strong coffee. The men huddled by the fire, shaking with cold, their wet outer garments steaming as they thawed. Samuel's lips were nearly blue, and his hands shook so badly he could barely hold the cup of coffee Margaret pressed into them. She knelt beside him, chafing his hands between hers, trying to restore warmth and circulation. "I was so worried," she said, not caring how it sounded, only relieved that he was alive. He looked at her through exhausted eyes, and something passed between them, some wordless acknowledgement of her concern and his gratitude for it. "I am all right," he said, his voice rough. "We found shelter behind a rock outcropping and waited for a break in the storm. I would not risk getting lost out there. You scared us half to death," Clara said from her chair, wrapped in blankets. "Do not do that again." "I will do my best not to," Samuel said with a slight smile. Then he looked at Margaret, his cold fingers curling around hers. "Thank you for waiting up for this. You did not have to." "Yes, I did," she said simply. After that night, something changed between them. The distance Samuel had maintained began to erode, replaced by a growing warmth and ease. Margaret caught him watching her sometimes as she worked, his expression thoughtful and intent. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the way his hand had felt in hers, the look in his eyes when he had thanked her. She tried to resist these feelings, knowing they were dangerous. She had no right to develop feelings for Samuel Easton. She was living under false pretenses, hiding her past, carrying secrets that could destroy whatever fragile trust was building between them. If he knew the truth, if he knew about her father's debts and the marriage arrangement she had fled, he might see her differently, might question her character and her presence here. But hearts do not always listen to reason, and Margaret's had been starved for kindness and genuine connection for so long that Samuel's steady, quiet strength called to something deep within her. Christmas came, and despite the hard work and isolation, the ranch house felt warm and welcoming. Margaret and Clara decorated with pine boughs and berries, and Margaret baked special treats she remembered from her childhood. Samuel brought in a small tree, which they decorated with strings of popcorn and small ornaments Clara had saved from their mother. On Christmas Eve, after a special supper, they sat by the fire together. Clara retired early, leaving Samuel and Margaret alone. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. "This is the best Christmas I have had in years," Samuel said quietly. "Since before Mary died, I think. You have brought life back to this house, Margaret. I want you to know that." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. "I am glad," she said softly. "I have found something here I did not expect. Peace, I suppose, a sense of belonging. You do belong here." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I know you came here running from something, carrying burdens you are not ready to share. I respect that. But I want you to know that you have a place here for as long as you want it." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Samuel. That means everything to me." He reached over and took her hand, his touch warm and gentle. They sat like that until the fire burned low, hands clasped, neither wanting to break the connection, neither ready to name what was growing between them. January and February passed in a blur of winter storms and hard work. The ranch endured, as it had for years, and life found its rhythm even in the harsh conditions. Clara's health stabilized somewhat, though she remained weak and spent much of her time resting. Margaret had essentially taken over all household duties, and Samuel had begun to rely on her judgment and input in matters that went beyond simple housekeeping. They worked well together, Margaret and Samuel, falling into an easy partnership that made the ranch run smoothly. The ranch hands noticed, of course, and there was good-natured teasing directed at Samuel when Margaret was not around. He bore it stoically, but Margaret noticed he did not deny anything either. One evening in late February, Clara called Margaret up to her room. She was sitting up in bed, looking thin and fragile but with a determined expression on her face. "Sit down, please," Clara said, patting the edge of the bed. "I want to talk to you about Samuel." Margaret felt her heart begin to race. "Mrs. Easton, I assure you there has been nothing inappropriate between your brother and me. I know that. Samuel is the most honorable man I know, sometimes frustratingly so." Clara smiled gently. "But I am not blind, Margaret. I see the way he looks at you. And I see the way you look at him when you think no one is watching. I also see that you are both dancing around each other, held back by propriety and circumstances and whatever secrets you are keeping locked away." Margaret looked down at her hands. "It is complicated. It always is. But here is what I want you to understand. My brother has been alone for 3 years now, carrying the weight of this ranch and my illness and a dozen other burdens without complaint. He deserves happiness, Margaret. He deserves love and companionship and a chance at the family he lost. And you, I think, deserve the same thing. Whatever brought you here, whatever you are running from, I believe you are a good person who has suffered in ways you have not shared. You both deserve a chance at happiness together. But you do not know everything about me," Margaret whispered. "There are things I have not told anyone, things that might change how you both see me. Then tell them. Not to me if you are not ready, but tell Samuel. Give him a chance to know the whole truth and make his own decision. I think you will find he is more understanding than you fear." Margaret wanted to believe that, but the fear ran deep. What if he cannot accept it? What if the truth drives him away? Clara reached over and took her hand. That is a risk. But is it not better than living with this wall between you forever? You are both suffering, both holding back. Time will heal what words cannot, as Samuel likes to say, but sometimes you need the words first. Sometimes you need to lance the wound before it can heal properly. That night, Margaret lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with Clara's advice. The thought of telling Samuel everything terrified her. But Clara was right. The secret stood between them like a wall, preventing anything real from growing. March arrived with the promise of spring, though snow still fell regularly, and the nights remained bitterly cold. The cattle began to calve, which meant round-the-clock work for everyone. Samuel was up at all hours, helping with difficult births, checking on newborn calves, dealing with the 100 crises that came with the season. Margaret kept the kitchen running, providing hot meals at odd hours for exhausted ranch hands, making sure there was always coffee and food ready no matter what time someone stumbled in. She barely saw Samuel during those weeks, just brief glimpses as he grabbed food and headed back out to the barns and pastures. One night, well past midnight, Samuel came in looking more exhausted than Margaret had ever seen him. He slumped into a chair at the kitchen table, too tired even to remove his coat. "Lost a heifer tonight," he said heavily. "Could not save her or her calf. Sometimes you do everything right and it still is not enough." Margaret poured him coffee and set a plate of food in front of him. "I am sorry. I know how hard you try to save them all. It is part of ranching, I know that, but it never gets easier." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Sometimes I wonder if I am doing the right thing trying to hold onto this place. Maybe Clara would be better off somewhere else, somewhere she could get proper medical care. Maybe I should sell and start over somewhere easier." "Do you want to do that?" Margaret asked, sitting down across from him. "No, this land is in my blood. This ranch represents everything my father worked for, everything I have built. But wanting something does not make it right. Sometimes we have to let go of what we want for the sake of those we love. Clara would be heartbroken if you sold this place for her sake. She told me as much. This is her home too, I know. But watching her fade away, knowing I cannot fix it, that is killing me." His voice cracked slightly on the last words, and Margaret saw the depth of pain he usually kept hidden. She reached across the table and took his hand. "You are doing everything you can. Sometimes that has to be enough. You cannot control everything, Samuel. You cannot protect everyone from every hurt. Sometimes the best you can do is be there and love them through it." He looked at their joined hands, then up at her face, and Margaret saw something shift in his expression. "When did you become so wise?" "I am not wise. I have just learned some hard lessons about things you cannot control." "Like whatever brought you here?" he asked gently. "Margaret, I have never pushed you to tell me your story, and I will not start now. But I want you to know that nothing you could tell me would change how I see you. I know who you are. I have watched you work yourself to exhaustion caring for my sister, running this household, never complaining, never faltering. Whatever happened before you came here, it does not define who you are now." His words were so similar to what Clara had said that Margaret felt tears spill over before she could stop them. "You do not understand. What I did, leaving the way I did, it was selfish and cowardly. I ran away from my responsibilities, from obligations I should have honored. Or perhaps you saved yourself from a situation that would have destroyed you." Samuel moved his chair around the table so he was sitting next to her, their hands still clasped. "Talk to me, Margaret. Let me help carry whatever burden you are shouldering alone." So she told him. The words came haltingly at first, then in a rush, the whole sorry story spilling out. She told him about her father's gambling addiction, about the mounting debts that had threatened to ruin them all, about her father's arrangement with a wealthy businessman named Arthur Wellington. Wellington was 53 years old, had already buried 2 wives, and had a reputation for cruelty. But he had money, and he was willing to pay off her father's debts in exchange for Margaret's hand in marriage. "I tried to accept it at first," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "I told myself it was my duty, that I should sacrifice my own happiness for my father. But as the wedding date approached, I kept hearing stories about Wellington, about how his first wife had died under suspicious circumstances, about how he kept his second wife virtually imprisoned in their home. And I realized that if I married him, I would be lost. So I stole money from my father's desk, money that was meant for household expenses, and I ran. I took the first stagecoach west, and I just kept going until I ended up here." She could not look at Samuel as she finished, too afraid of what she would see in his face. "So you see, I am a thief and a coward. I broke my father's word and dishonored his agreement. For all I know, he is ruined now because of me." There was a long silence. Then Samuel's hand gently lifted her chin, turning her face toward him. His expression was fierce, his eyes blazing with emotion. "You are not a coward," he said, his voice rough with intensity. "You are one of the bravest people I have ever met. Your father was wrong to try to sell you like cattle to pay his debts. That so-called businessman was wrong to enter into such a bargain. You owed them nothing. You saved yourself, Margaret. That was not cowardice, that was courage. But I ran away, I hid, I lied about my past. You survived. You escaped a terrible fate, and you built a new life through honest work and determination. There is no shame in that." He cupped her face in both hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "You are not defined by what was done to you, or by the desperate choices you had to make to escape. You are defined by who you have chosen to be since then. And the woman I have come to know is strong, capable, compassionate, and beautiful inside and out." "Samuel," she whispered, fresh tears streaming down her face. "I am falling in love with you, Margaret," he said simply. "I have been fighting it because I did not think I had the right, because I thought you might still be healing from whatever you were running from. But now I know the truth, and it changes nothing except to make me admire you even more. I love you. And if you will have me, I would be honored to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you are safe, valued, and cherished." Margaret could not speak through her tears, so she did the only thing she could think of. She leaned forward and kissed him, pouring all her relief and joy and love into that kiss. Samuel's arms came around her, pulling her close, and for the first time since fleeing St. Louis, Margaret felt truly safe. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet kitchen, the lamp burning low on the table, the world outside forgotten. When they finally pulled apart, Samuel was smiling, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Does this mean you feel the same way?" he asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. "I love you," Margaret said, the words coming easily now. "I think I have been falling in love with you for months, but I was too afraid to admit it. I thought I had no right to want anything after what I had done. But Clara told me I needed to trust you with the truth, and she was right." "Remind me to thank my sister," Samuel said. "She is more observant than I gave her credit for." They talked for hours that night about the future, about what it might look like to build a life together. Samuel was cautious, wanting to do things properly despite his feelings. He proposed that they court officially, that he give her time to be certain of her feelings, that they not rush into anything. But he also made his intentions clear. He wanted to marry her, to make her his wife, to build a family and a future together. And Margaret, who had thought she would never want marriage after what she had escaped, found that she wanted all of those things with Samuel. Spring advanced, and the ranch came alive with new growth and activity. The calving season passed successfully despite the early losses, and the herd was healthy and strong. Clara's health improved slightly with the warmer weather, and she was delighted by the courtship developing under her roof. Samuel courted Margaret with the same steady determination he brought to everything else. He brought her wildflowers from the meadows, carved her a beautiful wooden box for her few treasures, and took her on long walks around the ranch, showing her every corner of the land he loved. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. The ranch hands noticed the change and approved, happy to see their boss finally finding happiness again. Even old Jim, the most taciturn of the crew, was heard to mutter that it was about time Samuel settled down properly. But Margaret's past was not quite finished with her. In late May, a stranger rode into the ranch yard asking for Samuel Easton. Margaret was in the garden when she heard the commotion, and something about the rider made her blood run cold. She edged closer to the house, trying to see who it was. The man was well dressed in Eastern clothes, riding a horse that was clearly meant for show rather than work. When he dismounted and removed his hat, Margaret's worst fear was confirmed. She recognized him as one of Arthur Wellington's associates, a man she had seen at her father's house during the negotiations for her marriage. She ducked back behind the house, her heart pounding. Had they found her? Was Wellington still looking for her after all these months? She pressed herself against the wall, trying to hear the conversation happening in the front yard. Samuel's voice carried clearly, calm and professional. "What can I do for you, Mr. Harrison?" "I am looking for a young woman who may have passed through this area. Margaret Nash, though she may be using a different name. Dark hair, mid-20s, from St. Louis. Her father is very worried about her and has hired me to locate her and ensure she is safe." The lie made Margaret's hands clench into fists. Her father was not worried about her safety. He was worried about his arrangement with Wellington. "Why would you think this woman is here?" Samuel asked, his tone giving nothing away. "We have traced her movements west. She took a stage coach to Denver, then another south toward this area. Westcliffe was one of the towns she might have stopped in. I have been checking every ranch and homestead in the area. Have you hired any women recently who match that description?" There was a pause that felt like an eternity to Margaret. Then Samuel spoke, and his voice was like iron. "I am afraid I cannot help you. I do not make it a practice to discuss my employees with strangers, even those who claim to be conducting family business. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. I understand your caution, Mr. Easton, but this young woman's father is quite desperate. He is prepared to offer a substantial reward for information leading to her recovery, $500 to anyone who can tell me where she is." Margaret could hear the temptation in that offer. $500 was a significant sum, more than many people saw in a year, but Samuel's response never wavered. "That is very generous. However, my answer remains the same. Good day, Mr. Harrison. If you do happen to see or hear anything about Miss Nash, you can reach me through the telegraph office in Westcliffe. I will be staying at the boarding house for the next week, making inquiries." Margaret heard the man remount his horse and ride away. She stayed frozen against the wall, her mind racing. A week. Harrison would be in town for a week, asking questions, showing her description around. How long before someone in Westcliffe mentioned the woman working at the Easton ranch? How long before he returned? Samuel found her 10 minutes later still standing behind the house, her face pale and her hands shaking. "He is gone," Samuel said gently, pulling her into his arms, "and he will not find you here. But he will keep looking, and $500 is a lot of money." Someone in town might remember me, might tell him I am here. Then we will deal with it when it happens. You are not alone anymore, Margaret. You have me and you have this ranch. No one is going to drag you back to a life you do not want. You do not understand what Wellington is like. He does not give up when he wants something, and he has the money and influence to make life very difficult for anyone who stands in his way. Samuel's arms tightened around her. Let him try. This is Colorado, not St. Louis. His money and influence do not mean as much out here. And he would have to go through me and every man on this ranch to get to you. I promise you, Margaret, that is not going to happen. His certainty helped calm her racing heart, but fear still gnawed at her. She had worked so hard to build this new life, to find happiness and peace. The thought of losing it all, of being dragged back to marry Wellington, was unbearable. That evening, Samuel called a meeting with his ranch hands. He explained the situation in broad terms, telling them that Margaret was being pursued by men who meant her harm, that a man in town might come asking questions, and that the entire ranch needed to present a united front. To a man, they pledged their loyalty. Margaret was one of them now, they said. She had earned her place here with hard work and kindness. Anyone who tried to take her away would find themselves facing more trouble than they bargained for. Their fierce support brought tears to Margaret's eyes. These men, who had been strangers less than a year ago, were willing to stand beside her against a wealthy and powerful enemy. The week passed with agonizing slowness. Every day, Margaret expected Harrison to return with the sheriff, with legal documents, with something that would force her hand. But no one came. Samuel went into town on Saturday and reported that Harrison was still there, still asking questions, but so far no one had given him any useful information. Mrs. Henderson told him she remembered a woman matching that description, but believed she had moved on after a few days, Samuel reported. Several other townspeople said the same thing. I think they are protecting you, Margaret. Westcliffe might be small, but people here do not care much for outsiders coming in and causing trouble. On the 8th day, Harrison finally left Westcliffe, heading back east. Samuel learned this from the telegraph operator, who also mentioned that Harrison had sent a wire saying his search in this area had been unsuccessful. Margaret allowed herself to hope that she was finally free, that Wellington had given up his pursuit. But Samuel was more cautious. Men like that do not give up easily, he said. He may be pulling back for now, but we should stay alert. And Margaret, I think we should move forward with our plans. I do not want to wait any more. What do you mean? I mean I want to marry you soon, before summer ends. If you are my wife, it makes everything more complicated for Wellington. He cannot claim you are a runaway daughter who needs to be returned to her father's custody. You would be a married woman with a legal right to make your own choices. Margaret's heart raced for an entirely different reason now. Are you sure? We have only been courting for a few months. I have been sure since winter, Samuel said. I have just been trying to do things properly to give you time, but the circumstances have changed. I want you safe, Margaret. And I want you to be my wife, if you are willing. Yes, Margaret said, not needing time to think about it. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Westcliffe. Clara, though weak, insisted on attending and stood up as Margaret's witness, her face radiant with joy. The ranch hands cleaned up and came into town for the ceremony, filling the small church with their presence. Several townspeople also attended, including Mrs. Henderson, who had become an unexpected ally. Margaret wore a simple dress that Clara had helped her make, white cotton with blue trim, and carried wildflowers that Samuel had picked that morning. As she stood beside him at the altar, speaking the vows that would bind them together, she felt a sense of rightness that she had never expected to experience. Samuel kissed her gently when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know about his feelings. They had found each other against all odds, two wounded people who had learned to trust again, to love again, to hope for a future that had once seemed impossible. The ranch held a celebration that evening, with food and music and dancing that lasted long into the night. Margaret danced with Samuel under the stars, held safe in his arms, and thought about how far she had come from the terrified young woman who had fled St. Louis nearly a year ago. Later, in the room they now shared, Samuel held her close and whispered promises of protection and love. Margaret rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and allowed herself to believe that she was finally safe, finally home. The summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. Margaret settled into her new role as Samuel's wife, and together they ran the ranch with increasing efficiency and success. Clara's health stabilized, and she began to talk about perhaps moving to a lower elevation for the winter, staying with a cousin in Denver who had been inviting her for years. It was a bittersweet decision, but everyone recognized it was likely necessary for her survival. In late August, Margaret realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had seen what childbirth had cost Samuel's first wife, and the thought of putting him through that pain again frightened her. But when she told him, his face lit up with such genuine happiness that her fears eased somewhat. "We will get through this together," he promised. "And we will make sure you have the best care available. I will not lose you, Margaret. I cannot." They prepared carefully for the birth, arranging for a doctor from the larger town of Cannon City to be available when the time came. Samuel fussed over Margaret to the point where she had to remind him she was pregnant, not fragile, and perfectly capable of continuing most of her normal activities. Fall arrived, painting the aspens gold and bringing crisp, clear days. Clara left for Denver with promises to return in the spring, her departure tearful but necessary. The ranch settled into its winter routine, though this year the house felt warmer and more alive than ever before. Margaret's pregnancy progressed normally, though the last months were uncomfortable in the way such things always are. Samuel treated her like spun glass, which alternately annoyed and touched her. The ranch hands took to tipping their hats and asking after her health every time they saw her, treating her with a respect that spoke to their genuine affection. In late February, on a night when the stars were sharp and bright in the frozen sky, Margaret went into labor. The doctor arrived just in time, and after 12 hours of hard work, she delivered a healthy baby boy. Samuel held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face as he looked from the baby to Margaret and back again. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for this gift, for surviving, for being here." They named the boy James, after Samuel's father, and he proved to be a healthy, strong child who thrived in the mountain air. Margaret healed quickly from the birth, and life settled into a new rhythm that included the demands and joys of a baby. That spring, Clara returned from Denver looking healthier than she had in years. The lower elevation and milder winter had done wonders for her lungs, and she brought news that she had accepted a proposal from a doctor in Denver, a widower who understood her health challenges and wanted to care for her. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked his sister, holding his son in his arms. "I am," Clara said, smiling. "He is a good man and Denver suits me, but I will miss this place and I will miss you both terribly. You must promise to bring James to visit often." "As often as we can," Margaret promised, embracing her sister-in-law. "Thank you, Clara, for everything. For encouraging me to tell Samuel the truth. For welcoming me into your family. I will never forget what you did for me." "You saved my brother," Clara said simply. You brought life and love back to him when I thought he might never find it again. I am the one who is grateful." The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was always hard work, subject to the vagaries of weather and market prices and 1,000 other variables. But Samuel and Margaret faced those challenges together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. Margaret never heard from her father or from Wellington again. She sometimes wondered what had become of them, whether Harrison had reported her as lost, whether they had given up or simply moved on to other concerns. But as time passed, those fears faded, becoming less real than the life she was building with Samuel. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Emma who had her father's steady temperament and her mother's dark hair, and another son, Thomas, who proved to be a handful from his first breath. The house that had seemed so quiet when Margaret first arrived now rang with laughter and children's voices, with the sounds of a family living and growing together. Samuel proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching his children about the land and the work while never pushing them beyond their abilities. Margaret watched him with their children and felt her heart overflow with love for this man who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, who had seen past her secrets to the person she truly was. On their 10th anniversary, Samuel surprised her by taking her on a trip to Denver. They left the children with the ranch foreman and his wife, who had become trusted friends over the years, and spent a week in the city together. One evening, as they walked through the streets, Margaret found herself thinking about how different her life might have been if she had not fled St. Louis, if she had not ended up in Westcliffe, if she had not been hired by Samuel Easton. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, noticing her silence. "About choices," Margaret said. "About how one decision, one moment of courage or desperation can change everything. If I had stayed in St. Louis, if I had married Wellington as my father wanted, I would have been so miserable I might not have survived it. But you did not stay. You chose to save yourself, and that choice brought you to me." He pulled her close, right there on the street, not caring who might see. "I thank God every day that you had the courage to run, that you ended up in Westcliffe, that Mrs. Henderson sent you to my ranch. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Margaret. You and our children are my whole world. And you are mine," she whispered. "You taught me that time heals what words cannot, that sometimes you just have to keep living until the pain eases. But you also taught me that words matter too, that sometimes you have to speak the truth, no matter how scary it is. You gave me a safe place to heal, and then you gave me a reason to want more than just survival. You gave me love." They kissed there on the street, 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through honesty, hard work, and an abiding love that had only grown stronger with time. When they returned to the ranch, their children ran to greet them, and Margaret looked at the house, the land, the life she had built here, and felt nothing but gratitude. This was her home, these were her people, and she belonged here in a way she had never belonged anywhere before. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythms of ranch life. James grew into a responsible young man who loved the land as much as his father did. Emma proved to have a gift with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animals with patience and kindness. Thomas was the wild card, always pushing boundaries, always testing limits, but with a good heart that shone through his mischief. Samuel's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines deepened around Margaret's eyes, but their love never wavered. They worked side by side, raised their children together, and built a legacy that went beyond just the ranch itself. They were known throughout the area as fair, honest people who treated others with respect and helped their neighbors when help was needed. Clara visited regularly from Denver, bringing her husband and eventually 2 stepchildren who adored their Colorado cousins. The families would gather at the Three Pines Ranch during summers, filling the house with noise and laughter, creating memories that would last lifetimes. On Margaret's 40th birthday, she stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Samuel came out to join her, slipping his arm around her waist in the comfortable way of long married couples. "Happy?" he asked, a question he had asked many times over the years. "More than I ever imagined I could be," she answered honestly. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that I found you, that we built all of this together." "You know what I think about sometimes," Samuel said. "I think about that scared young woman who arrived in Westcliffe with one small trunk and more secrets than luggage. And I think about how brave she was, even though she did not feel brave. She was running, yes, but she was also searching. Searching for something better, for a place where she could be herself, for a chance at real happiness. And she was brave enough to keep searching until she found it." "I found it in you," Margaret said, leaning into his warmth. "In this place, in this life we have created. You told me once that time would heal what words cannot. You were right. Time helped me heal from the wounds of my past. But it was not just time, Samuel. It was you, your patience, your love, your willingness to give me space to heal while still being there when I needed you. You saved me in ways you will never fully understand." "You saved me too," Samuel said, kissing the top of her head. "I was just going through the motions before you arrived, surviving but not really living. You brought light back into my life. You gave me a reason to hope again, to dream again, to believe in the possibility of happiness. We saved each other, Margaret. That is what love does." They stood there as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear their children laughing, arguing good-naturedly about something. The sounds of life, of family, of home. Margaret thought about the long journey that had brought her here, the fear and pain she had endured, the courage it had taken to leave everything behind and start over. She thought about Samuel, who had looked past her secrets to see the person she truly was, who had offered her safety and patience and eventually love. She thought about their children, about the life they had built together on this beautiful, hard land. The secrets she had arrived with, the burdens she had carried, had not disappeared entirely. She still sometimes dreamed about her father, wondering what had become of him, feeling twinges of guilt for leaving him to face his debts alone. She still sometimes thought about Arthur Wellington and the fate she had escaped, feeling grateful and slightly guilty for that gratitude. But those old wounds had healed over time, scar tissue forming where there had once been raw pain. Samuel had been right. Time had healed what words could not fully express or resolve. And in the healing, she had found something she had never expected, a love that was deep and real and lasting, a partnership that made her stronger, a family that filled her heart to overflowing. "What are you thinking about now?" Samuel asked, able to read her silences after so many years together. "About how lucky I am. About how grateful I am that I was brave enough to run, that the stagecoach happened to stop in Westcliffe, that Mrs. Henderson sent me to your ranch. About how every choice, even the scary ones, led me to exactly where I needed to be." "Not luck," Samuel said firmly. "Courage, choice, and maybe a little bit of fate, but mostly your own strength and determination. You made this life, Margaret. You chose it, you fought for it, you built it with your own hands. Never forget that." As they went back inside to their children, to the warm house filled with love and laughter, Margaret knew he was right. She had made this life through courage and choice and perseverance. And it was a good life, better than she had ever dared to dream possible when she had first fled St. Louis with nothing but fear and desperate hope. The years continued their steady march forward. James married a teacher from Westcliffe, a smart young woman named Sarah who fit perfectly into the family. They built a house on the northern section of the ranch and began raising their own family, ensuring that the Easton legacy would continue into another generation. Emma studied veterinary medicine through a correspondence course, one of the first women in Colorado to do so, and became invaluable to the ranching community with her knowledge and skill. She married late, choosing carefully, and found happiness with a quiet man who shared her love of animals. Thomas, true to his nature, struck out on his own, heading to Montana to start his own ranch. He visited regularly, full of stories and adventures, but he had needed to forge his own path rather than following in his father's footsteps. Through it all, Samuel and Margaret remained the steady center, the foundation upon which the entire family was built. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year, each shared challenge, each quiet moment of contentment. On their 25th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Clara came from Denver with her family, and friends from Westcliffe and neighboring ranches filled the house and yard. It was a joyous occasion, full of music and food and stories and laughter. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, the family gathered around the large table in the dining room. James asked his parents to tell the story of how they had met, a story the children and grandchildren never tired of hearing. Margaret looked at Samuel, and he nodded, giving her permission to tell it her way. "I arrived in Westcliffe on a cold autumn morning," she began, and the table fell silent, everyone leaning in to listen. "I was running from a life I could not endure, carrying secrets I was afraid to share, with no real plan beyond survival. Your father gave me a job when I had nothing to offer but hard work and a willingness to learn. He gave me a safe place when I needed it most. And when I finally found the courage to share my secrets, he gave me understanding and love instead of judgment. Your mother taught me that time heals what words cannot," Samuel continued, taking up the story. "But she also taught me that sometimes you need the words first. She was brave enough to trust me with her truth, and that trust changed both of our lives. She arrived with secrets she could not share, and I told her that time would heal what words could not. In the end, we found that we needed both, time to heal and words to build trust and love." Little hands reached for cookies, grandchildren whispered to each other, but the older children listened intently, understanding perhaps for the first time the depth of what their parents had overcome to build this life. "The point is," Margaret said, her hand finding Samuel's across the table, "that sometimes the hardest moments in life lead to the greatest blessings. I was terrified when I came here. I had lost everything I had known, and I had no idea what the future would hold. But I was brave enough to keep going, to keep trying, and I found something better than anything I had left behind. I found home. I found family. I found love. And that is what we want for all of you," Samuel added. "To have the courage to face hard things, to trust the right people with your truth, and to build lives filled with meaning and love. Your mother and I have been blessed beyond measure, and we hope you will be too." As the evening wound down and families prepared to head home or to their guest rooms, Margaret stepped out onto the porch for a breath of air. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars she had marveled at on her first night at the ranch all those years ago. Samuel joined her as she had known he would, slipping his coat around her shoulders. "Quite a life we have built," he said softly. "Quite a life indeed," she agreed. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for giving me time when I needed it." for loving me even when I was too afraid to fully love you back, for building this incredible life with me. Thank you for being brave enough to run, to start over, to trust me with your secrets, and to take a chance on a lonely rancher who did not know how much he needed you." Samuel pulled her close, and they stood there beneath the vast Colorado sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something lasting and true. The years that followed brought the inevitable challenges of aging. Samuel's joints grew stiff from decades of hard work, and Margaret's hair turned completely silver. But their minds remained sharp, and their love never faltered. They handed over more of the ranch operations to James and his family, content to step back and let the next generation take the lead. They spent their days together, sometimes working in the garden Margaret had cultivated over the years, sometimes sitting on the porch watching the grandchildren play, sometimes simply sitting by the fire in comfortable silence, needing no words to communicate their contentment. Margaret never regretted her decision to flee St. Louis, to take that leap into the unknown. Yes, it had been terrifying. Yes, she had carried guilt and fear for a long time. But in the end, that single act of courage had led to everything good in her life. It had led to Samuel, to their children, to this ranch, to this full and meaningful life. Samuel never regretted giving that scared young woman a chance, trusting his instincts that there was more to her story than she was telling. He had been right, and in discovering her truth, he had found his own happiness again, had been given a second chance at love and family. As they grew older, they became a fixture in Westcliffe, respected elders whose opinions were sought on matters large and small. They were known for their fairness, their generosity, and the love story that had become something of a legend in the area. The woman who had arrived with secrets and the rancher who had given her time to heal, who had built a life together that stood as a testament to the power of patience, trust, and love. On a warm summer evening, as they approached their 50th wedding anniversary, Margaret and Samuel sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for decades. Their hands were clasped together, wrinkled now but still strong, still holding on to each other as they had for half a century. 50 years, Margaret marveled. Where did the time go? Into this, Samuel said, gesturing at the ranch, at the life they had built. Into our children and grandchildren. Into every sunrise we watched together, every challenge we faced side by side, every quiet moment of peace. The time did not disappear, my love. It became this life we have lived together. Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady comfort of his presence. If you could go back and do it all again, would you change anything? Not a single moment, Samuel said without hesitation. Every joy, every sorrow, every challenge brought us to where we are now. I would not trade this life for anything. Neither would I, Margaret whispered. You saved me, Samuel. You gave me a chance when I had nothing. You loved me when I felt unlovable. You built a life with me that exceeded my wildest dreams. I arrived at your ranch with secrets I could not share, terrified and alone, and you gave me time to heal, space to grow, and love that never wavered. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. We saved each other, Samuel corrected gently. You brought light back into my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever. You gave me a reason to hope again, to love again, to believe in the possibility of happiness. You are my partner, my love, my best friend, and the mother of my children. You are everything to me, Margaret. You always have been. They sat there as the stars began to appear, marking another day ending, another night beginning. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property, living their own lives while remaining connected to this place and to each other. The ranch thrived under James's management, the land as productive as it had ever been. But the real legacy Samuel and Margaret had built was not measured in acres or cattle or even in the prosperity of the ranch. It was measured in love, in family bonds that had been carefully nurtured, in the example they had set of what a true partnership looked like, in the courage they had shown in facing their fears and choosing to build something beautiful together. As they prepared for bed that night, moving through the familiar routines of a lifetime together, Margaret caught sight of their reflection in the bedroom mirror. Two old people, worn by time and work, but with eyes that still sparkled when they looked at each other, with hands that still reached for each other in the darkness. "I love you," she said, words she had spoken thousands of times but which never lost their meaning. "I love you," Samuel replied, pulling her close. "Always have, always will." They slept as they had for 50 years, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. Their 50th anniversary celebration was a grand affair that brought people from 3 counties. The ranch was filled with family and friends, with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Speeches were made, toasts were offered, and stories were told about the legendary romance between Samuel Easton and the mysterious woman who had arrived in Westcliffe with secrets. But the most touching moment came when James stood to speak about his parents. "My mother and father taught us many things," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "They taught us the value of hard work, the importance of honesty, and the power of love. But perhaps the most important lesson they taught us was about courage and second chances. My mother was brave enough to save herself when no one else would. My father was wise enough to give her the time and space she needed to heal. Together, they built something that has enriched all our lives. They showed us that it is never too late to start over, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that the best things in life are worth fighting for. Here is to Samuel and Margaret Easton, the foundation upon which this family stands." The applause was thunderous, and Margaret felt tears streaming down her face as Samuel squeezed her hand. They had done it. They had built a life, raised a family, and created a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. As the celebration wound down and the guests began to depart, Samuel and Margaret found themselves alone on the porch once more, their favorite place to watch the world go by. "No regrets?" Samuel asked, a question he had asked many times over the years. "Not a single one," Margaret answered, as she always did. "You? None. Except perhaps that I did not find you sooner, that we did not have even more years together." "We have had a lifetime," Margaret said. "A full, rich, beautiful lifetime. That is more than many people ever get." "True," Samuel agreed. "And I am grateful for every moment of it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one, marking another night, another day in their shared journey. The ranch was quiet now, peaceful, the sounds of celebration fading into memory. Margaret thought about the frightened young woman she had been, arriving in Westcliffe with nothing but secrets and hope. She thought about Samuel, the lonely widower who had taken a chance on her. She thought about all the moments between then and now, the laughter and tears, the challenges and triumphs, the ordinary days that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Samuel asked, though he probably knew. "For everything. For seeing me, for loving me, for building this life with me, for being my home." "You are my home too," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "You always have been. From the moment you arrived with your secrets and your shadows, you were home to me. I just had to wait for you to realize it too." And there, on the porch of the ranch house they had shared for 50 years, under the vast Colorado sky, Samuel and Margaret Easton held each other close and knew that they had found what everyone searches for: true love, a place to belong, and a life worth living. Their story became the stuff of family legend, passed down through generations. The woman who arrived with secrets she could not share, and the rancher who said time would heal what words could not. Together, they had proven that courage and love could overcome any obstacle, that trust was worth the risk, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest decisions. Years later, long after both Samuel and Margaret had passed peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, their great-grandchildren would still tell their story. They would speak of courage and second chances, of trust and patience, of a love that had stood the test of time and built a legacy that continued to grow. The Three Pines Ranch remained in the family, a testament to everything Samuel and Margaret had built together. And every evening, as the sun set over the mountains and the stars began to appear, someone in the family would look up at the vast sky and remember the couple who had shown them all what true love looked like. Margaret had arrived in Westcliffe running from her past, and she had found her future. Samuel had been surviving, and she had taught him to live again. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust in love, give time for wounds to heal, and believe in the possibility of happiness even when it seems impossibly far away. Their love story was not perfect and their lives had not been without challenges, but they had faced everything together with courage and commitment and an abiding love that never wavered. And in the end, that was all that mattered. They had loved well, lived fully, and left behind a legacy that would continue for generations. As the stars shone down on the ranch, on the land they had loved and worked and called home, the spirit of Samuel and Margaret's love remained, woven into the very fabric of the place, a reminder that love can heal, time can mend, and courage can transform everything.